Vielen Dank.
Thank you. The presentation has many titles. First, it was called Don't Believe the Hype. And now I would like to take you on a tour. Because 2 years ago, I started questioning myself, is there any continuity? There seems to be a new trend every year. And sometimes we call it bullshit bingo. Now it's artificial intelligence. Then it's the blockchain, it's the platform economy. But in the whole process of digital transformation, the question is there anything that is constant or permanent? This is a question I would like to answer. And then, of course, I'll be speaking about artificial intelligence and machine learning and also about the blockchain. However, the thread running through my presentation is the platform economy. What is it, the platform economy? I'm sure you all still remember these paper catalogs. You could call them the platform economy 1.0, which means that what platforms do is that they occupy a certain user interface. That is their strength. And in the past, it was the mail order catalog that connected the producer or the hosts, in the case of the travel industry, and the customer. Today, there are different platforms, many different types of them. Of course, there are Google, Amazon, Facebook, and Apple as the big players, but there's also HRS, Booking.com, Airbnb. All of them are platforms, and the business model as such is always very similar. And let me decipher that for you. This is a very well-known picture, and I'm sure you've seen it before in many presentations, but still, it illustrates so well how user behavior has changed, how the users themselves have changed, and they are the ones driving this transformation. We are now in the era of mobile communication, and we are now entering into the fourth cycle of the digital transformation. And the next step will be the Internet of Things and artificial intelligence. As you see here, and you see the user numbers on one axis and then the timeline on the other, you see that the spread of these technologies accelerates. For all the players, for all the stakeholders, including in the travel industry, it means that we have to deal with ever shorter and faster innovation cycles. The interesting part about this is that there is always a certain so-called dilemma zone. At least that is a theory created by Clay Christensen, who says that whenever you move from one technology to the other, new players enter the market. We see it now. Apple dominated the era of mobile. With the iPhone, they were the first who offered a touchscreen, and they took most of the market share. And now there's Amazon. Siri somehow doesn't really take off, also partly because of the privacy problems. And you see how the process, as I said, is going to accelerate even more. What we also see here is that innovation can always start at the bottom. Last year, I gave a speech here on digital language assistants or speech assistants. And that was a time when Alexa was still pretty new, and we had to start by explaining what Alexa was. Today, everybody talks about it and knows about it. But there are still people who argue that they don't really work 100%. The thing is that at the moment, those who were the dominant players in the mobile age realize that there is a new trend coming. It's already too late, because they are still investing in their existing business model. And then all of a sudden there will be Amazon, at least that's my prediction, and grabs a large chunk of Apple's market share. We sometimes call that the Kodak moment. So that's whenever such a thing happens to big companies, because this is precisely what Kodak had to go through when digital photography was created. They also had digital cameras, but They did not attack or question their own business model, but that is precisely what you have to do. You have to be willing to attack or cannibalize your own business model because as Facebook says, if we don't kill the thing that kills Facebook, somebody else will. And this means, in turn, if you don't want to end like Kodak, you have to think and consider innovation that might undermine your own business. And what's just as important, competition also comes from the bottom. In the first smartphones, for example, there were cameras. And of course, they were not as good as conventional cameras, at least not in the beginning. And so Kodak didn't believe that this would be a danger to their business model. But now, if you look at the iPhone X, you see that there is a very strong focus on the camera and its quality. That means there are very unexpected competitors around now. That is something that you see very often when you talk about platforms or when one platform replaces an existing platform. In conclusion, that means we have to change the way we act, and that applies to global players like Google, but also to small companies. We need a culture of innovation, and we need the room to experiment. This is just a part of Google's product pipeline. But you see that they are trying out a lot of different things. They have so many products, and not all of them prevail and ever make it to the market, but others then are very successful and are scaled. In existing companies, the thing is very often that they are very good at execution and at improvement. That means they have their business model, and that could be a hotel chain or anything else, and they keep improving it again and again and again, but very few venture into the realm of exploratory action. But that's what you have to do. Because of the accelerating development cycles that I mentioned in the beginning. This acceleration means that the innovation that is created around us has to inspire us to become innovative ourselves. One reason is also that the users, because of the big players, the GAFAs, they are very spoiled. There's a lot of customer focus, and the customers know that, which means that the customers expect that the focus is on them, also when they go to a hotel. And they don't want to fill in a registration form manually that is then typed into a computer by somebody else. So the expectations created by Google and Amazon in particular are then transferred to other areas as well. The learning is here that we need a lot of different individual experiences. This is based on Schrader's theory. We need a space for exploration and a space for exploitation. So the moment I've made an attempt or a trial and it's successful, I have to integrate it into my core business and make it resonate. And that's how I'll be able to create value. When it comes to the business models of platforms, they always have a gatekeeper function, which means the platforms normally use the APIs, and that's how they determine the rules of the game. These four big players do that, and they are the best at doing it. And I always tell smaller companies, if you want to learn, just look at them and how they do it. But the underlying question is, what is it that these platforms can do? Google doesn't really own any information. Amazon doesn't own any products. Facebook has no content, and Apple doesn't own any music. However, what they're really good at is data management, and this takes us to artificial intelligence. There's this very nice quote by the chief editor of T3N who says that data are the fuel of artificial intelligence, and that is why the big data trend is made for a world pervaded by artificial intelligence. This means For these big companies, data are not a problem anymore. They are the fuel that they use to improve their products. The more data I have, the better I can make my product, the more I can customize it. Everything that you see on Amazon, suggestions of products and so on, it's all based on the principle of machine learning. And it's the same with Alexa. Alexa, by being used, learns more skills. If you look at how machine learning works, it means that you enter data, there's an algorithm that processes the data and that optimizes itself. And the more data you enter and the more skills you have, the better the product will become, in this case, Alexa. This means even for Amazon and for Google, with the digital language assistants and so on, the goal is to take as much market share as possible, as quickly as possible, because the software learns from the fact that it's very widespread and has access to data. And data is power today. I still find this a very impressive chart. I mean, look at these four. They have market capitalization that equals the German and the French stock market index taken together. And they also use that power. We can make a distinction between what we call digital champions and then large companies that still work in a kind of niche, and then the smaller ones. I've taken BlaBlaCar here from the tourism industry. And they're becoming more important very quickly by focusing on service. You know, in the past, you had to take care of sales. Then there was a strong focus on advertising. Today, the focus is entirely on services. Amazon does everything to improve the customer experience. There's a great book on this by Matthias Schrader. He says that if you understand the code of the digital transformation, you'll be able to come up with innovative and successful business models. One question is, what's the difference between companies and platforms? And to understand that better, you can take a look at the music industry. So interestingly, here there's one task. It's about listening to music or enabling people to listen to music. And you can offer that in different ways. If you are a manufacturer of tapes, let's say, then you can only let people listen to a certain sequence of songs, and then you would have to rewind or go forward. So that was improved with the introduction of the CD. Then downloads were even better than that, but now with streaming, that is the most convenient way of listening to music that you could imagine. So if there's any continuity in this, is that the task is the same, but there are different solutions for how to provide that task or deal with that task. So as you see here, the development from CD to downloads to streaming is something that companies can try to benefit from. Well, perhaps you still remember this. Perhaps very soon, not very many people will still understand what's the connection between a pencil and a tape. The industry has simply changed so fundamentally, and we've gotten used to new ways of listening to music. Here I have another quote to you which says that the digital transformation starts with the user, which means the users change their behavior, and this creates a market. And only then is it up to the companies to change. That's important to understand, because that tells you that you have to focus on the user and not do navel gazing and just look at yourself. If you focus on the user, that is always a very good starting point. I said before that users change and customers change. Normally what is involved here, that there is a push and a pull solution. There might be an old solution that's outdated. It pushes me away. And then there's a new solution that pulls me towards it. Let's say I've had enough of CDs and I want to start streaming. But then sometimes people overlook that there are two other factors that play a role. One is anxiety, which means that people are afraid of that new solution. They are not sure whether they'll be able to work it. They are afraid that there will be contractual problems with a subscription. And another factor are habits. You're just used to putting a CD into your CD player, or perhaps you're even listening to records. That means you have to take these two factors at the bottom into account as well. And you can't just follow the principles of push and pull. And there's actually another great book on this. You can buy it online. It's a PDF, and it's called When Coffee and Kale Compete. This book describes jobs to be done, and it says basically, if there were to be competition between coffee and kale, because with these smoothies, you want to achieve one thing. You want to give your customers a good start off to the day. Now let's say I'm Starbucks. Of course, I want my coffee to be better than other people's coffee. But that's not the only approach. You have to look at what the users want. And now let's say you realize that your users don't only pick between coffee and nothing else. Then it might be possible that a kale smoothie is competition to a coffee. This means you don't look at it from the perspective of competition, but you look at it from the perspective of the customer. And perhaps your customer might consider a kale smoothie a real alternative to a cup of coffee. Another thing that is very common for platforms is the digital service layer. That means it's very hard to distinguish between what is a service, what is a product, what is an experience. I mean, look at this desk. I remember that in the past I had many different products on my table. A fax machine, for example. Today, when I send a PDF, is that a product or a service provided by my email provider? That means this old distinction becomes blurred. Sergey Brin summarized this by saying, always do the toothbrush test, which means always look at what do your guests use on a daily basis, what are their daily routines and tasks. Let's say they come to a hotel, there's always a check-in, but a check-in can be very different. Then there's the way you have to walk from the check-in to your room. There can be very different experiences on this way. The lighting can be very different, and that's up to you. So you have to understand whether there is a market, whether there is some added value to be created. If there is something that can become a part of our habits, that's a good indication. And then on top of a physical product, let's say an electronic toothbrush, there's always a service layer. And this is something that Oral-B created. Here you have, for example, a Bluetooth connection to your smartphone. You see whether you're applying the right pressure when you're brushing your teeth and so on. And this is what is called software as a service. And then the thing is, there is an app for everything, but apps are dying out already. So you'd rather say there is a skill for everything. And there's actually an Alexa for every shit, you might say. So you can tell Alexa, please warm the toilet seat for me. And in the hotel, that's very easy to arrange. You can use these plugs, for example. They are connected to an Alexa skill, and you can just tell it, switch off the light, switch on the light, switch on a toaster, or whatever else. So what do we learn from this? Don't focus on your product too much. Look at the customer. The customers want to do something with your product. You see, here is the customer. In combination with your product, the customer becomes somebody else. And that's something I really like about this visualization. It tells us that way too often we focus on the product too much and wonder about how to improve it without considering what the customers want. The customer has a task to solve, and that can be done in different ways, and even more with digital products. That's another very good book, Value Proposition Design, very well written, and it gives you some advice for how to achieve that focus. I said before that habits matter. Normally in a platform economy, you have a gratification component. There are freemium products like, for example, Spotify. You can use it for free, and then normally you should be transferred to a subscription. And normally that is controlled by the manufacturer. They always say that they offer you better service and more products and so on, but very often it's you who pay extra for it. What platforms normally do is that they try to look at things from the user perspective. And for a hotel, that would mean that I should join that trend. I think what becomes clear is that the digital services and the digital platforms are slowly pervading our everyday life. They try to create marketing association chains. Let's say I have to go somewhere, and then immediately I think of Google. I want to listen to music. I think of Spotify. I want to shop something. I think of Amazon. That's the way they want it to work. And of course, there are now some overlaps between their business models, but that is their basic approach. And then the same in the hotel industry. This is a commercial that doesn't say anything about the actual service. It just says, hotel, Trivago. So hotel is the question, Trivago is the answer. And that means when you sit in front of your computer and you need a hotel, you type Trivago no matter what. And then there's the principle, the winner takes it all. If that applies to you, it means that you have access to more data. With that, you can improve your product. With a better product, you have access to more data. It's a virtuous circle. Normally what happens is you have a core service, and if you take Amazon, that was selling books, but then you'll be able to expand that service. You have more data, you get more attention, and then this continues. And then from a normal login, you move to a lock-in, and it is basically impossible not to use the system. It says here that it's easier for software to enter other industries than for other industries to hire software people. This is what you currently see in the automotive industry. Software is becoming an ever more important part of cars, and they find it very difficult not to be taken over by platforms, because the software starts being more important than the actual car. The same happens in the tourism industry. You can do booking services, revenue management, and so on. It started out as a booking engine, but now they're increasing and expanding their portfolio. Then there is, of course, the concept of the walled garden. In that garden, everything is just beautiful. It's this wonderful universe, but it's impossible to leave it. It's one sealed-off ecosystem, and that's why it's called a walled garden. Now, what will we learn from this part? The customers perceive and understand the core product less and less, but it's all about the overall experience. It's about how the customers behave and about the process and the journey they go on to. To me, that means I can't just focus on my process and on my service, but I have to understand that overall context. There's another book I would like to recommend. This is Service Design. Thinking was the first part, and the second one is now This is Service Design Doing. This book contains very many different tools and methods that can help you to shape and design your product in a systematic way from the customer perspective. One word on adding value. If you still remember that, there used to be this concept of value in exchange. So let's say there was a television set producer like Grundig. They sold a device, and that was it. That was the end of the value creation. Then people just watch TV, and that's the end of it. Today, this works completely differently. It's about value in use. Apple sells this device here, and then by using that, they create more value with subscriptions, for example. And Jeff Bezos, again, summarizes it all. You could buy an Echo before Christmas for 39 euros, and you can't tell me that this will make them rich. That's not the point. Jeff Bezos says we want to make money when people use our devices, not when they buy our devices. And this tells us it's not about earning money on these devices. You just offer people these products and also a broad range of products so that it fits every customer, and then the use generates the added value. And then, as I said, the concept is value in use. It's via Prime or Fresh or video or music. This is how they earn their money. So what can we learn from this? Platforms have high investment costs and they have to attract many customers very quickly, but then they have enormous economies of scale. Let me say one last word about blockchain. Is blockchain the solution? I do think that when it comes to the whole sharing part, blockchain will lead to major transformation because it will also, to some extent, do away with the platforms. But the principle is simple. You can carry out secure transactions by entering a block, and then there is a consensus process decentrally to reconcile whether the block will be accepted. That means it's a very secure system. I think what's important to know is that, yeah, I know you have to stop me, sorry, running over time. Again, the important thing is to look at it from the user perspective. Let's say I had a stressful day at ITB. I can either go running, I can play PlayStation, I can have a Coke, or I can eat sweets. So that's the competition, horizontal competition from the user's perspective. How can I find a good end to my day? But then from the competition perspective, it's only competition between Nike and Reebok. And the question here is not how do platforms compete, but what else could we do with the blockchain? And this leads to questions about horizontal innovation, and I'm sorry that I cannot elaborate on it now. Thank you very much.